So welcome everyone, and let's begin by bowing in. Couple of announcements. If you would like to discuss your meditation practice with Barry or with me, please email us either at our personal address, or if you go to Path of Awakening Buddhist Center, you can find an email link there and email us that way. Or if you would like Tonglen instruction, we can always do that during the meditation, take you into a separate breakout room. These are just some administrative details. If you can make a donation, please do it. Again, you can do that at pathofawakeningbuddhistcenter.org, and there's a donate link there. I think that's about it, at least that's what's coming to me now, in the way of administrative details. Oh, and if you would just like to have a discussion about your practice, we welcome that. This can be a personal relationship as well as it can be a public lecture. So, we're beginning to discuss taking refuge, the Buddhist ceremony of taking refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And to that end, I recommend reading chapter 10, Buddha Dharma Fever. Also, next week, we're going to read chapter 11, which is about taking refuge. And then I'm going to send out another chapter on taking refuge, which will cover a lot of the same ground, but I think it's even better than these first two. And it's from another book altogether by Trungpa Rinpoche. And it's really quite excellent. So we'll have 3 sessions, this tonight, next week, and the one after. After that, we are going to have the refuge ceremony for those people who would like to take refuge. And we'll be doing it online. This will be a first. There are some challenges. How many people here do not know how to do a prostration? Raise your hands. Okay. It's the challenge is to demonstrate it on Zoom. How can you get a picture of a full body doing a prostration? But we'll work on it. Actually, I need a volunteer to demonstrate the prostration. And then we could get together afterwards and figure out how to do it with Zoom. Anybody? Volunteer? Oh, come on. Yeah, Ed Pepantonio. Great. Thank you. Ed, you and I will talk and we'll figure out how to demonstrate. There are basically different kinds of prostrations. The full prostration requires that you be in adequate physical shape to do it. You go all the way down on the floor. But then for those of us who have physical disabilities of one kind or another, there are sort of lesser versions of the prostration where it doesn't require as much movement and energy. All the way up to the most mildest form is a tabletop. You just do it right on a tabletop. And we'll demonstrate these because that's an essential part of taking refuge. You do 3 prostrations according to your physical capacity. And also there's going to be a bit of a challenge. You get a certificate with your name, your Dharma name on it, your refuge name. And normally these are handed out as part of the ceremony, but we're not going to be handing anybody anything. So they'll probably have to be emailed in advance, and I'll ask you to print them out, or at least have them on screen or something that you can look at, and you'll get a Dharma name. In this regard, for anybody who would like to take refuge, it's very important, essential, in fact, that you have a discussion with me. I'm going to be the preceptor. And just let me know, either by emailing me at my email address, and I'm going to put it in chat right now. Or you can email this is my personal email address. It's sent out to everyone in chat. Or you can go to the Path of Awakening Buddhist Center.org and send an email there. And frankly, any email that you send there will get to me. And we'll set up a time for a conversation, probably 15 to 30 minutes, something like that. And that's essential. All right, so let's start talking about refuge and what it means. As we tread the Buddhist path, Mary D is asking, what is the conversation about? Can you hear Mary? Okay, good.
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah.
Okay. So, as we tread the Buddhist path, we begin to connect more and more with the idea of what it's about, which is really to achieve sanity or freedom from confusion, awakening from confusion and neurosis into sanity and clarity, open-heartedness, and appreciation for our lives and for the world. So before we feel that our lives are problematic, that we are confused, we don't know how to deal with ourselves. But as we begin to tread the path more and more, we begin to see that it actually works, that this process of meditation practice is curative, and that we can switch our orientation from samsara to enlightenment. Samsara meaning suffering and confusion, to enlightenment meaning awakening, clarity, confidence, peace, sanity. And we begin to see that samsara is really a habit that we have developed, a habit of habitual patterns, things that we have learned in the past which are not helpful, patterns that we enact again and again. And we would like to free ourselves from this habituation. It's neurotic. And that really this is what meditation is all about. And the way in which we do this with meditation is constantly coming back from dream into awareness. Simply by coming back into awareness, that's all it takes. And if we start to beat ourselves up for our behavior, our mental behavior, we're back in samsara. Samsara is all about self-criticism and self-improvement. Those are two sides of the same neurotic coin. If you feel that you're lacking, then you want to improve. If you want to improve, it's because you feel that somehow you're not up to standard. So self-criticism and self-improvement are the very stuff of neurosis and of samsara. And what meditation practice is simply seeing that activity of self-criticism, self-improvement And in the act of seeing it, you are already not doing it. If when you see your thoughts, you say, oh, that's a bad thought, I should get rid of that thought, you're back doing it again. It's simple. It is so easy. That's why nobody can get it, according to Trungpa Rinpoche. It's so simple. Everybody wants to do more. They want to improve. It's not a matter of improvement. It's just a matter of waking up, of coming back from the dream, and of seeing whatever it is now. There's tremendous self-acceptance in that. Self-acceptance because we're not trying to improve ourselves, which implies self-criticism. Just seeing whatever it is in your mind, in your experience, in the six knowables, as they call them, appearances, they call them. Just seeing them. And so we begin to realize that we can develop a discipline that goes against our habitual neurotic patterns of self-criticism and self-improvement, and the way in which we project these out on the world. Because if you're critical of yourself, then you're going to be critical of the world similarly. We begin to realize that we have been shopping, as it were, for other kinds, for forms of self-improvement. We shop all the time. What should we have for dinner? Oh, hamburgers or hot dogs, or oh, pasta. We're shopping. We're always looking for something better. And especially when we look at our own states of mind and our own happiness, we are looking for something better. And this path, the act of meditation, is to give up that shopping. And really what taking refuge is a matter of committing, giving up the idea of looking for something better and committing to this open awareness right here, again and again. And so we're inspired to commit ourselves to this discipline, because really, when we take refuge, we're affecting our own freedom from the tyranny of self-criticism and self-improvement. I once heard Trungpa Rinpoche say, I've repeated this so many times, self-doubt, self-criticism, self-doubt, is the Buddhist version of original sin. And it happens over and over again, and it can stop at any time, and it does. So when we take the refuge vow, it's a funny term for it, refuge. We're not asking for someone to save us or protect us, to give us some kind of protection or refuge from the storm, as it were. Where there is a refuge from the storm, but it lies in our own minds, our own ability to come present, to wake up over and over again. That's where we get the true refuge. And we take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. It's a threefold refuge. And you're not asking someone to save or protect you. And the inspiration to take the vow comes from learning how to rest your mind by practicing meditation. We start with shamatha practice, where we simply see our thoughts, we identify them, and we come back to awareness. The moment that you see your thought, you're already back. And then we work, if we're working with the breath, we work with the breath going out. We also work with vipassana, which is awareness practice. The breath goes out, we're one with the breath. It dissolves into space. And as it dissolves, our awareness is right here. And this is the awareness aspect. You're aware of the room that you're in, your body, whatever might be happening. The virtue of the shamatha practice is that it brings you back from dream. And it gives you a rest as well from the anxiety of thought. The virtue of awareness practice is that you begin to see the true nature of confusion, suffering, samsara in all its horror, ugliness. It can go very far. And you also begin to see the true nature of reality, what this world really is, as it arises and passes away so beautifully in the present. So Rinpoche says, by taking refuge, you are trying to liberate yourself from basic anxiety, from samsara. You yearn for this. You realize that you could free yourself and practice delightfully. Basically, it's all an exercise in finding freedom. Freedom from the tyranny of our own minds. And it's very delightful. He says, you find the teachings fitting and you begin to feel very fortunate. And you share the fortune with yourself and others. And that's what it means to become a refugee. It's funny. You become a refugee, you see. It's a very lonely journey, although we take it with our Dharma brothers and sisters. But at the same time, just like our births and deaths, we travel this path alone in the company of others. Yeah, and when we are not practicing, when we forget to come present, then we find ourselves back in the prison of samsara, the unhappiness of wanting things to be different, self-improvement, which has nothing to do with the appropriateness of the situation. These are old habits that arise again and again, and usually they're totally inappropriate, or at least partially inappropriate, which makes them even more subtle. But when we're totally here and present, then we can see the world accurately as it is, stripped of our personal idiosyncratic judgments. And we can respond powerfully, effectively, with compassion and clarity. And this is an interesting one. Obviously, you should not immediately try to liberate others without first making your own commitment to liberate yourself. So in order to be of use to others and help them, first you have to start with yourself. If you become less of a nuisance and produce less garbage, he says, you then can begin to help clear out somebody else's garbage. That is why you take the refuge vow. You're committing to working on yourself, to becoming sane, to freedom. You vow that you will always clean up after yourself. You vow that you will not distort the world you are living in with your own contribution of pollution. So you take the refuge vow to realize your own sanity, and in order to make sure that you do not create chaos or harm others. And you can set an example. I particularly like the notion that one begins to see that this is the path to freedom, sanity, virtue, true virtue. And that when taking the refuge vow, you're committing yourself to that path, to giving up all the neurosis that attends egotism and self-aggrandizement. So at this point, I'm going to turn the talk over to Barry, who's going to talk about letting go of theism.
Okay. This is a little daunting because, John, you just covered a lot of what I was going to say very beautifully, but let me go over a few things. Yeah, I'm going to go over a few things anyway, even though I feel you did cover them. That, first of all, on a very simple level, taking refuge is not a requirement, like we've reached this, part of the course and now you must take refuge. This is, you may or may not. And in fact, it's worth taking a look at motivation. Like if you feel that you would like to take the refuge vow, why? And that the motivation should come from an inspiration, not a feeling of duty or an expectation that you're going to gain something through that. That as we progress along this path, at a certain point, it just makes sense. It becomes clear that other pursuits have no lasting value. And that in this practice, there's more here than just a brief respite experience during meditation of finding some peacefulness. That's where most of us begin, seeking and actually finding some degree of relief in meditation and in this practice. But as we continue, and John certainly laid this out very nicely, that first with shamatha and then vipassana awareness, we see that things have become more workable, that we have become more workable, that the mental stuff that we have spent so much time lost in is actually something we can work with. And then we can begin to gain some confidence that escaping these routines of repetitive, habitual preoccupations is possible. That anxiety and dissatisfaction that is so much a part of our lives is not inevitable. That this stuff actually works. And through that experience, a certain kind of confidence develops. And from that can come the inspiration to make this kind of formal commitment of the refuge vow. One of the things he says in the reading early on is we realize the illness of samsara and the healthiness of nirvana. And I love that. For many of us, coming back into the present moment, just in the routines of our daily life, can be a vivid experience. That, well, walking down the street, for instance, you realize that you've been lost in thought, and because of the time you spent sitting, because of this practice, when you become aware of that, you come back. And when you do, suddenly you become aware of things that you were not. There's a sound in the air that you just weren't hearing. You feel a breeze on your cheek. And it can be a very stark demonstration of moving out of dreams and into a kind of awakening, of coming back. A demonstration of samsara and nirvana right there on the spot, in the moment. So, yeah, simply put, we feel inspired to take this vow because this stuff really works. Now, I want to point out also that taking the vow, it's called Refuge Vow, and it is not refuge in the sense of a refuge from the vicissitudes of everyday life, a place to hide out or something. It's kind of the opposite. As John has said, it's to become fully present to whatever is happening in every moment. Another thing is, he mentions briefly here that the refuge vow, taking refuge, is not a theistic undertaking. Now, non-theistic in the sense that you are not asking someone to save you. And taking the vow is not something that is going to save you. Now, non-theism is not atheism. That's just another belief. Maybe non-belief would be a better phrase. But non-theism in this context is letting go of the expectation that there is some greater power that's going to save you, that the perfect guru will save you, that the perfect relationship will save you, that winning the lottery will solve everything. You know, it's turning away from all of that. And these are all a kind of theistic mindset that can manifest itself in many ways. That a belief that happiness can be found by acquiring or achieving something. So what I'm getting at here is that it can be tempting to view the refuge vow as an achievement. Another thing to check off the list on the way to enlightenment, or something you can brag about. Hey, I took the refuge vow, did you? That the inspiration from the practice leads one to this vow, and the taking the vow, you receive inspiration to continue on the path. One of the things he says in the reading here is you find dharmic messages quite fitting and you begin to feel very fortunate. See, there can be a sense that you have found a home in the Buddha Dharma. You can stop window shopping. And that is a kind of freedom. It just makes sense, it works. And I guess that's what I had to say. Should we have any questions and answers? Discussion, argument, disagreement?
Let's go on and finish. And
Well,
we'll have
I was
discussion.
I was just going to say I loved the sentence and the non-theistic, the theism part on page 85 when it says, that's why the Buddhist practice is called non-theistic, because you don't have to rely on any aids. nobody is going to jolt you except for your own mind. I thought that, I just love that sentence. I thought it encapsulated it beautifully, the whole thing that you were talking about, Barry, too. That it's no aids necessary, just your mind. It's great. I love that.
Thank you. Yeah. So this chapter concludes with a discussion of devotion and humbleness. And the importance of the appreciation of the lineage, that these teachings have been handed down, these teachings about sanity from one person to the next, from the time of the Buddha, 2,600 years to the present. It's a very living tradition. And it changes all the time because of just what Barry said, the lack of theism. When you have a theistic tradition, then the words that are connected with the divinity are kind of cast in concrete. So you have a Bible or a Quran or some other holy book. But in a non-theistic tradition like Buddhism, words are regarded simply as useful to particular people at particular times and places. And people keep improving on the statements of the others, the ones who went before. And this has happened throughout the development of Buddhism over these 2,600 years. There have been constant refinements and changes and improvements, and the teachings have adapted to changing times and places. So our devotion to the lineage is the devotion is appreciation for the inspiration of the people who came before and who gave up egotism and self-aggrandizement, discovered freedom from that, and passed it on. Like someone with a candle that's lit, passing on the flame to another person, lighting their candle again and again. Humbleness here doesn't mean sort of putting yourself down or, being very small and, insignificant. What humbleness means is the absence of arrogance. Arrogance is self-assertion, egotism, pride. And humbleness here means simply being so present, so simply awake and aware that you're open to everything and anything. There's an analogy for people who, the different kinds of students, and the analogy is of a cup. And the worst cup is the cup that has full of arrogance. It's poison. And you can't put teachings in it because there's poison in the cup. And that poison is arrogance, self-importance. Humbleness is the absence of that. The second kind of bad cup is the cup that has a hole in it. So if you put the teachings in, they just go straight through and don't stay. And the third kind of cup is obviously a clean, solid cup that when you put the teachings in, pour them in, they stay there. So humbleness here means absence of arrogance, absence of the poison of egotism. And it allows you to hear and experience the teachings properly. He says, your whole being is completely empty, waiting for the teachings to enter into you. Arrogance makes you impervious, unable to hear the teachings. You carry it around like a big growth on your back, pretending it is wisdom and virtue. And the way to remove that and we all come to it to some degree, come with that, is through sitting practice. It's the only way. It's the only way because sitting practice involves boredom, the practice of awareness, and boredom is a great slayer of ego. Ego always wants to be entertained. That's what ego is. It's a constant desire for entertainment, self-improvement, self-criticism. They're painful forms of entertainment. They keep us occupied. The essence of ego. With humbleness, you just here, you do the practice. And when you do it in a very simple way, repeatedly, coming back into this present moment with whatever techniques you're using, there is a magic that happens, a magic that enters you. It's the magic of beginning to understand the Dharma, the teachings, and developing the confidence that you are the same as a Buddha, that you can do this. It comes gradually, and it's very magical because we constantly think that, gee, if I practice harder, then I'll get somewhere, as though there's a causal relationship. But really what you're doing is you're making yourself available for the teachings to enter into you. And it's surprising how it happens. It's as though it just happens in spite of oneself. That's the magic. All you have to do is practice. Study helps. Study helps you practice. It gets you down to the cushion, gives you inspiration. And then you practice. You practice on the cushion. And if you can bring your practice into your daily life, it's even better, more powerful. And this is what is recommended. Some more things that he said. Taking refuge means that you are giving up your own territory, your own arrogance, and becoming altogether stateless and groundless. Every time we come present, completely present, and we give up the thoughts of I and other, we're giving up positioning. We give up the whole idea of how to locate ourselves in time and space, as though there were some location. So we're giving up ground when we give up ego. That's like that slogan. The bad news is you're falling through centerless space. The good news is there is no ground. So again, taking refuge in the Buddha as an example, we realize that we do not need any external deity. We realize that we have Buddha nature. The Buddha is an example of this. And fundamental excellence is already within us. Taking refuge in the Dharma, the teachings, we realize that we do not need to listen to any doctrines taught in the name of egotism, ego fixation, ego improvement. Taking refuge in the Sangha, we realize that the companionship of brothers and sisters in the Dharma, sitting and practicing together, is the best companionship. And finally, he says, we've discovered something worthy of taking refuge in, worthy of bowing to, which is our ancestors who went before us, who include anyone who has transmitted sanity to us, anyone, whatever the lineage or tradition. This is what is meant by discovering the dwelling place of the ancestors, which is part of taking refuge. So the bottom line is that taking refuge is not about joining a club. It's kind of fun to get a name. I actually have friends who use their refuge names. I had a good friend. He always used part of the refuge name. His name was Michael Cohen, and he always went by Cherub. Cherub is transcendent wisdom. That was part of his refuge name. And many others like, Pema Chodron. Many of you have read her books. That's her refuge name. Means lotus Dharma holder. Pema Chodron. But the bottom line is that one is committing to sanity, and one has begun to understand what sanity is. The constant letting go of the habitual patterns that dominate our minds, which are all about egotism, self-aggrandizement, and especially self-improvement and self-criticism. There's a term in the Tantras they talk about, and forgive me if I've already told you this, the ultimate evil is a demon called the Gelgong. And the Gelgong, which literally Gel means to conquer, Gong is spirit or demon. The Gelgong is the spirit of self-criticism. And the flip side of that is the desire for self-improvement. And it perverts, it contaminates our lives and our relationship with the world. So I think that's plenty. And we'll have a discussion if you like.
Oh, John,
Yes?
actually, Merrick put a question in chat. And would you like to just present that to everybody? And Merrick, are you still here? I'm not.
You talking about me, Barry? What is the conversation about? That one?
No.
Oh, there it is. There's Merrick's. There it is. Sorry. Go ahead.
Merrick Dunn.
I'm asking really genuinely here because it is a bit confusing to me. If there's nothing to be achieved or lost, why take the vow? I understand the idea of commitment, but won't taking the vow automatically create something else than just this? Doesn't it create another duality or state of being? Before and after the vow, as if there's some other state or stage than just this.
Wow. Actually, that's a good one. Well, I could say something about it, and you probably could too, John. Because I hear confusion about this frequently, that if there's no, if we're not trying to improve ourselves, if we're not trying to achieve anything, then, what are we doing? That, first of all, that there's a difference between trying to improve yourself with a belief that you will escape suffering and anxiety in that way is very different than yearning to be useful, for instance, or to be able to assist someone, or to simply do a better job at something you're doing. It's a different kind of thing. It's not operating out of an ego investment. Now, so no, there's nothing to be achieved by taking the vow in the sense that it's going to save you, or, somehow be the answer for you. But there it there is a purpose to doing it. And that purpose has to do with, because taking the vow speaks to you in a different way. That you're there with a preceptor after doing quite a bit of preparation, which is part of what we're doing now, and more that's going to come. And then actually formally taking the vow, that all of that, you're really speaking to yourself and committing yourself to stop farting around. That, that you felt inspired to do that because you can see that this is real, that this really works. And that inspiration brings you to the vow. And as I was saying, I just realized in preparing for this class that taking the vow serves as an inspiration to continue with the path.
I think that question contains really the fundamental problem in Buddhism altogether, the conundrum. And that is this, that if the idea of self-improvement is the problem, that we have to improve ourselves is the problem, then what are we doing on this path? And it comes down to this, that we are fundamentally, at our core, already awake. It's just that core, that fundamental basis, which is called Buddha nature, has been covered over by self-doubt. And so we come to the path, inevitably, inspired to improve ourselves by, it's an irony. It's almost a self-contradiction. We're going to improve ourselves by giving up the idea of self-improvement. That conundrum informs the whole path. It just gets subtler and subtler as the practitioner goes along and begins to discover more and more and have more and more confidence in their underlying sanity, discovering it and having confidence in it. That's the magic that happens as we practice. And so that paradox is there throughout our practice. I mean, you sit down on a meditation cushion and you make an effort to come clear, present, awake, and the very effort obscures it. But then the effort dissolves and suddenly awakening is there because it's our nature. It's who we actually are. It's already there. It's not something we have to create. And so it's a gradual dissolution, a dissolving of that lack of self-confidence. Confidence in our fundamental nature is so important. It's something we discover, and it's what motivates us to take the beginning of the discovery of that is what motivates us to take the refuge vow. Again and again in the teachings, especially the Tantric Vajrayana teachings, they talk about those who delight in and rest in the confidence, which is primordially free. It's the confidence in our awakened nature. They live the lives of Buddhas. They live a life of appreciation of humanity, very simply. And that confidence, that self-confidence, it's because we are fundamentally awake. And it creates this fundamental paradox that we come to the path and we begin to understand that what we're giving up is our notion of self-improvement, and that becomes another form of improvement. But then we give it up. And every time we do, we come present. We begin to appreciate that. And more we shift our loyalty from anxious, self-aggrandizing thought to simple awareness in the present moment. which is already there. It's happening right now. You can't shut it off. You're aware of everything in your room and the sound of this voice and all of this stuff. That awareness is there fundamentally. And that's what we come back to. So thanks for that question, Merrick. Anybody else?
I was just going to say that it strikes me that it's so hard for me to get my head around, having been raised in a Christian tradition where you're born in sin. And the only way out of that sin and that guilt is through the Savior, through Jesus. And this is such a radically different idea of our humanity.
Yes, that we are fundamentally Buddha. We are fundamentally wholesome. Fundamentally, at our core. There's the notion then in the Shambhala teachings, which is so important, of basic goodness. That we and this world are fundamentally wholesome, worth being here for. And that the self-doubt and sin, so-called, is an adventitious accretion, which comes and goes. And the analogies are, so there's so many analogies. For instance, one of the classic ones is of a beggar, a poor person, who's living in a hovel, right, with a dirt floor, this shack in utter poverty, and doesn't realize that beneath the floor is buried a treasure. This is an analogy for us. We think that we're so poor and we have to improve ourselves and make things better. And we don't realize that we have this enormous treasure, the Buddha nature. Thank you, Megan.
Ed?
Ed.
I want to piggyback
One second, Jane.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, Ed was about to speak. And then you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought Barry said Jane. Oh, go ahead.
It's okay.
Thank you. So this may be a bit simplistic in terms of the paradox you described, John, but I think one of the obvious things that we all realize is the whole fact of impermanence and change, and that we're constantly changing. And when we start studying this, it really isn't a question of saying I want to improve myself, but realizing that in the change, how are you going to change, and that you have a control over the change through working with your mind. And it isn't that it's an improvement, it's just a realization.
Well said. Thank you. Jane.
Two things. I'm struggling with a lot of this, and part of it is what Dan just wrote about. Following the past implies that there's something wrong and we need to be fixed. So part of the idea that I really struggle with is that following the past is based on a deficit model. There's something wrong with us. Yes, we have inside, buried deep and layered over many times a Buddha nature, but we've lost it and we suffer. And so we're broken and we have to get fixed. So that's one piece that I have a lot of problems with, that it's based on a deficit model about sentient beings needing to be woken up because they're not, number one. Number two, I had a lot of problems with the word humbleness and question, it's a question, is it an issue of translation? And humbleness has a very different connotation from humility. So one humbles oneself before someone else. Humbleness means that you are lower than someone else, where humility just means that you are not narcissistic, full of self-aggrandizement, that you walk around without a lot of ego. You have humility and gratitude and appreciation, very different from humbleness. And since it was so emphasized in the chapter, in the reading, I thought maybe it was an issue of translation. And I would wonder what the original Sanskrit word, what the connotation of that is. Or is it really the whole idea of taking refuge and humbling yourself before the lineage deities and Buddhas? Is that, it's a lot of
I
questions.
think you're on. I think it's, I don't know. I'm going to go find out what the Tibetan or the Sanskrit for that is. It would be the Tibetan probably. And look into how it was translated. I think you're right. Humility is better because it's the absence of arrogance. And that's the way of defining this humbleness, is the absence of arrogance, not of making yourself smaller or lower, than somebody else, which could be another kind of falsehood. I think it's
Right, so when one bows, for example, traditionally in ancient times before the king, or even in current times, in England, you bow when you depart from the queen. And that's humbling yourself before somebody. That's very different from having humility. So, and it's kind of when you were talking about the prostration, which, I'm very familiar with because it's part of Jewish practice on the high holy days. On Yom Kippur, we prostrate ourselves before the Torah. And when you first come across it, it's really, really startling, but it's an idea. It's not before a God. And I think that sometimes that's misinterpreted. Anyway, that and this idea of a deficit model, I can't get past that. That it assumes we're broken and that we need to be fixed, and that's why we need to follow this path. And it's totally contradictory to the idea that samsara and nirvana is the same thing, which I get and I believe, and I think that has always resonated with me. We talked about that before. And I accept suffering. I think it's just part of being human. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with me. I don't have to get past it.
the idea that we're broken and need to be fixed. That is what is the problem. That is what needs to be fixed. It's a great conundrum. And what happens is, on the path, that people begin to connect with their Buddha nature, with the clarity. It starts out very simply. With shamatha meditation, people begin to realize that they can get a relief from their suffering by practicing meditation. It calms, you come back from anxiety. That's the beginning. And what's really beginning to happen is that people are beginning to get in touch with their basic sanity, their basic fundamental nature. And the anxiety of self-improvement and self-criticism mitigates, thins out. And the whole path to enlightenment is a gradual thinning of that, and a gradual rising of the awareness of what being awake means in the present moment. call it a shifting of your loyalty from anxiety, fear, self-improvement, all of that, to confidence and awake mind in the present moment. And it takes place gradually in each stage of the path. We start with the Hinayana, and there are these two subdivisions. They are about that. And then you get to the Mahayana with its 10 bhumis, 10 stages. Each one of those is a stage of a thinning out of self-doubt and a rising of self-confidence in the basic Buddha nature. And they say of the last of those bhumis, those stages of the Mahayana path, just before enlightenment, the 10th, they say that the Bodhisattva, the practitioner at that level of the path, realizes, senses that they're about to achieve awakening, full enlightenment, but that something is holding them back. And what's holding them back is self-doubt. And when they realize that, they pass through it. So the path really is the introduction to each one of us. This is the essence of it, of awakened mind. And we begin to become inspired by it more and more as we connect with it more and more profoundly. And this takes place, this introduction or this meeting with enlightened mind takes place in a variety of ways. The main thing is it either takes place usually through study and practice, and it can take place through the relationship with the lineage in the form of teachers, individuals, and they can communicate it very powerfully to each of us. And when we see it, we begin to go, there's a relaxation, a giving up that takes place. You're giving up that tension of feeling that there's something wrong with me. But it's so subtle and it adheres, it sticks. So for instance, another example, they say that the Bodhisattva in the middle of the path is really appreciating the discovery of reality, which is devoid of I and other, devoid of self-aggrandizement, right? Devoid of self-doubt. But that very appreciation of that and the freedom from suffering that it brings is another form of suffering.
Mhm.
It's another form of comparison. And the analogy for that is of a perfume bottle, which is you've poured the perfume out. The perfume was the suffering, samsara, confusion. That's the emptiness. Now you're free of it. You've begun to realize your Buddha nature. But the thing is that when you hold that bottle to your nose, you still smell the fragrance of the suffering. And so we appreciate the release. And that very appreciation is another form, a subtler form of suffering too. And it goes on and on like that until we finally settle in and become grounded in the real. That this is sober, sobered up, as it were.
I'd like to say something else, Jane. That what to me, how I related to your question was the first noble truth of the Buddha, which is the recognition that suffering is pervasive, that we all live with suffering all the time. And it was an examination of that then led him to enlightenment. Now, just a recognition of the suffering we experience is very different than saying we're broken. Capiche?
No, thank you. I mean, there's so much to unpack. I understand. I'm, a major beginner in this journey, and so I have a great deal to learn, but these questions come up, and this is a format where I feel comfortable asking them,
Oh, please do. Good
answer.
questions.
And the idea that I'm not alone in questioning this is not something that one takes lightly at all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Barry.
And John, if I may just add something to Jane's question about the prostration. It's my understanding that when we prostrate, it's not that you prostrate to a God or a higher being or even the Buddha himself. You prostrate to the knowledge that there's a Buddha within you, and prostrating to yourself, laying yourself before yourself, laying down, is what teaches you humbleness with time or with prostration.
Yes, thank you.
Mhm. Thank
And
you.
also,
Yes.
when you prostrate, it's an expression of gratitude,
Right, yes.
teachings. And when you prostrate, always, you are taking refuge. You literally, when you prostrate, you go, I take refuge in the Buddha, I take refuge in the Dharma, I take refuge in the Sangha, and then you go down. So you're reaffirming the vow over and over again. But you're right, I think you're absolutely right, Benjamin. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Jane.
I have to say, I feel I'm a beginner on this path also, but something happened yesterday. I got 2 medical bills that just shocked me, and I was really able to change my habitual pattern. I was able to not go into my reactive state. I was able to call these people and really be, I don't know, I noticed a change in my behavior, and I feel that's from the studying and being with all of you, and really paying attention and trying to incorporate what I'm learning here. I really felt a difference in how I dealt with that situation. So
Right.
thank you.
Cool.
Any other questions, comments?
I just put a question in the chat. I was just curious how the refuge names are generated.
That's part of the purpose of the conversation. And as you will read, the refuge names, to the extent that, it's a bit of serendipity, but they're meant to indicate your nature and your potential.
I certainly experience mine as aspirational.
I think everybody does. Except Rinpoche gave some really unusual refuge names sometimes. A lot of them were sort of normal, like Pema Chodron, Dharma holder, Lotus Dharma holder. And he gives one guy a name, River of Death.
Really?
Get that one. I'm all shocked. Anyhow, I'm not going to give anybody the name River of Death. But the idea is that they're sort of aspirational names, depending on the quality of your personality. Yeah. I'll tell you a funny story about me. Should I? Rinpoche always said, don't be confessional.
Oh.
You're not supposed to tell people your bodhisattva name, only your refuge name. But I'll tell you my bodhisattva name. There's a term for Hinayana practitioners. When you achieve realization, you become a non-returner. That was my Bodhisattva name. And the way I got it was this. I was very speedy in those days and constantly doing. And Rinpoche was giving Bodhisattva names, and I rushed in because I was the director of the meditation center. And I said something to him, asked him a question, blah, blah, blah. And then I left. And he turned and gave my Bodhisattva non-returner. So there can be some humor in these things too.
Uh-huh.
So let us know, and we will have conversations. And part of the purpose of the conversation is to, so that you can express yourself about what your inspiration is, and any doubts that you've got, or inspirations, or positive, all of that.
Great.
Okay. Look forward to it. So, any other questions or comments? And if not, we can end for the evening.
Good. We're
Thank
good.
you. Wonderful to see you all.
Same here.
Okay, let's do the dedication of merit if you can. Here, hold on a second. I'll put it on screen.
Thank you.
Mute, please.
Oh, yeah. By this merit, may all obtain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great East, may the lotus garden of the Rigdon's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory. Okay, everyone. See you all next week.
Good night. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
thank
you
you.
again.
Buddy.
Good night.
Thank you
Good
all.
night. Thank you.
Thank you all. See you next week.
Thank you all so much.
Morning. There's always the morning.
Yes. Be an interesting morning.
For sure.
As always. Good night.
John,
Thank
can
you, John.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks.
John, can I ask a quick question? Was Mara a Gyalgong then?